Today we're going to start building our app for this tutorial series. We'll build an AI-powered brainstorming and journaling app that lets us create entries, categorize them with tags, and use AI to generate summaries and related ideas. Also, today we'll be adding a super powerful tool to your tool belt, prompt libraries. You'll be amazed what this simple concept can do for you. And we're not just going to learn how to build apps using AI. I'm going to show you a super cool way to plug in a reusable prompt I created that will act as your tutor while building apps. You'll see what I mean, but you got to stick around to the end to see that part in action. We'll build our app up incrementally throughout this series. At the end of today's tutorial, we'll have all our project up and running with the core pieces in place and have a basic UI. We'll be building the UI using the Vue.js framework and having our AI coding assistants generate all the code. We'll be using two AI coding assistants, Aider and Cody. Now this is the third tutorial in our Mastering AI Coding series. If you haven't watched the first two videos, I recommend you do that now. But if you'd rather just jump in here, you can follow the instructions linked in the video description below to get your dev environment set up. This series isn't so much about building the brainstorming app, it's about teaching you how to use AI coding assistants effectively to build whatever you want. It's about helping you create a workflow you can use over and over that takes a ton of the hassle out of building apps and getting the best results possible from AI for software development. Okay, let's dive in. Now, if you're going to follow along and create the app, you'll need VS Code, Aider, and Cody installed. In the first video in this series, this one shown here, I demonstrated how you can prompt an AI chatbot to give you detailed step-by-step installation instructions for nearly any tool. Let's watch that section again. For example, here's a simple prompt I put together to get step-by-step instructions for installing the Aider AI coding assistant on my Mac. Notice that I approached this from the perspective of a pure newbie. The only technical details I gave ChatGPT were the OS I'm using and the AI model I want to use with Aider. Now I'll provide all the prompts in the video description below. Notice how ChatGPT didn't make any assumptions about things like tools we already had installed. It gave us installation steps for everything we could possibly need. In that video, I also provided the prompts I used to tell me how to install both Aider and Cody on my Mac. You can use those same prompts and just tweak it to mention your OS. If you don't already have Aider and Cody installed, you'll need to pause and do this if you're going to create our app. Also, if you don't have VS Code, you can modify one of those scripts and request instructions for that tool or any tool you find you need to install. Now, in a few minutes, we're going to get into using Cody with prompts from our prompt library. And those prompts live in our account inside of the sourcegraph.com website. So when you set up Cody, you're going to create an account with SourceGraph. And what you're going to do to get to your prompt library is the following. Go to sourcegraph.com, log in, and once you're in, you're going to see in the upper menu a couple of options under Tools, Save Searches, and Prompt Library. So to get to the prompt library, of course, you're going to select Prompt Library. And here are all of the prompts that I'm going to be using. Actually, there's more shown here than I'm going to be using in the tutorial. But this is my prompt library inside Cody. And this is what gets pulled in when you're using Cody's chat window in the drop-down list for the prompts. So if you need to create the prompts, I'll provide the prompts to you in the description of the video. But to create the prompts, you'll go click on the New Prompt button here. You'll give your prompt a name, a description, and then paste in the prompts that I have in the tutorial. Now, before we get into it, I want to give you a quick overview of the process we're going to follow. We're going to start with a simple project idea about an app we want to build. And then we're going to go into Cody's chat window and we're going to use some pre-canned prompts from our prompt library, which I'll show you in just a moment, to help us generate some requirements for our app. And then we're going to also use a different prompt from our prompt library to have Cody generate basically what I'm calling a bill of materials. It's basically the tech stack and dependencies for our application. And then we're going to use all of that and we're going to select a different prompt from our prompt library and have Cody help us generate our first set of user stories for our application. Now, once we have all that documentation ready to go, we're going to then open up a terminal and start Aider up. And then we're going to feed Aider these documents that describe our project, the requirements, the technologies and dependencies and versions, and the user stories that we're going to use to kick off our project. So I mentioned the concept of a prompt library. This is basically a set of reusable prompts that you can use over and over in your coding assistants. So anytime you find yourself during your workflow repeating a prompt or a particular type of task over and over, and especially if that prompt requires very well-crafted, detailed instructions for the LLM, you should consider putting it into a prompt library. Now, Cody provides an online way for you to create your own prompts in your library and organize them. And then when you log into Cody in VS Code, it automatically synchronizes these. So for example, I have several prompts here, that some of which we're going to use in today's tutorial. I have one that basically helps me to create a list of technologies and dependencies, etc. And you can see how detailed this is. I would never want to have to do this, craft this prompt over and over every time I need to use it. So I put it in my prompt library. And as you can see here, when I click on the prompts drop down in the Cody chat window, you'll see that I will have this bill of materials available to me. I can just select it, and it basically pulls in the contents of this prompt for me, and I can execute. Now, as I said, we're going to take advantage of some of these prompts in today's tutorial. Also, we're going to see how you can take advantage of a prompt library using Aider as well. So here I've started a new project and fired it up in VS Code. Now, there's no source code in this project yet, only one document. The other documents are empty. We'll be filling those in with Cody's help in a few minutes. But all we have right now is a basic idea for an app we want to build. And so here's what we're going to build. I want to build an AI-powered brainstorming and journaling app that helps users capture their ideas, categorize them, and provide additional content suggestions. The app should allow users to create entries, tag them with categories or keywords, and generate summaries or related ideas using AI. This will be a personal productivity tool aimed at helping users organize and expand on their thoughts. I want to keep this app simple. It only provides the features I've described above. It shouldn't need to communicate with any external services such as a remote database or API. So we have a rough description of what we want our app to do, but we're going to need more than that. We're going to need some requirements, and then we're going to need a tech stack, including libraries and dependencies, etc. And then we're going to need a set of initial user stories so that we can get Aider to start implementing our app. So to do that, I'm going to open Cody, new chat window, and notice it's already got the document with our project idea in it and its context. And I'm going to select the prompts drop down. And we're going to start working with some of the prompts from our prompt library that I shared with you a few minutes ago. The first one is we're going to generate some requirements from our idea. So here's the prompt from our prompt library that's going to use our project idea and flesh out some requirements. And it's going to give us those requirements, according to our prompt here, in a uniquely numbered list so we can refer to them later. So I'm going to go ahead and execute that prompt. Okay, Cody's generated an initial set of requirements for us. Let's take a look at it. So we have some requirements for our user interface. Let me expand that a little bit. So provide a simple, intuitive interface, implement tagging. We did mention tagging in our description. Obviously, we've got to allow users to provide entries for the journal. We said we wanted some AI features, so the app's going to use AI to assist the user in creating their content and making suggestions to them. And then, of course, we've got to store some data, such as the entries. And then there's some other general requirements that Cody's suggesting, such as ensuring the app remains simple and focused and optimizing for performance for quick entry creation and retrieval. Now, I don't see anything here that I disagree with. If I did, I do also have another prompt that would actually take these and allow me to revise them or offer suggestions. For instance, I might want to remove one or revise one of these requirements. And so here I have another one that would let me do that. And that it would tell Cody, okay, I want to review the requirements, ask me for numbers of the ones that I want to revise or eliminate, and then give me an option to eliminate or revise. And we're not going to do that right now. Now that we have our requirements, the next thing we need is our tech stack. Now, specifically in this tutorial, we're going to focus on the user interface. So we'll get into the backend components and the data storage, etc., in future tutorials. But right now we need to create our tech stack for the user interface. So we have our prompt to help us with that. That comes from the prompt library that we saw earlier. And this one is for generating the UI framework and a BOM, bill of materials. So in this case, by bill of materials, I simply mean there's a list of user interface libraries along with the versions of each of those libraries. So we're going to start out with this prompt. And we're saying here, basically, we need to build a new application. We want you to start by confirming you understand the application requirements. And then we want your help in selecting or we may select a core technology for the user interface, such as React, Vue.js, or Angular. And then after that, we want some guidance in selecting the various UI frameworks that we might need for our basic user interface for Vue or for Angular or for React, etc. And then at the end, we wanted to also the LLM to ensure that there's compatibility between the different libraries and also between the versions of the libraries to help ensure that when we start generating code, we don't run into issues. So the final result is this. It'll be simple. You'll see a bill of materials that has libraries and dependencies. So I'm going to go ahead and execute this. And you can see it's following our instructions. First, it's confirming this is a summary of our requirements for our app. And it asks if this accurately reflects it. And I want to say yes. Just going to say it's good. And now it's asking what our core tech is for our UI. I'm just going to go with Vue.js. Don't know a whole lot about it, but I'm going to find out something about it here. I did a tiny bit of research on it before this. All right, so Vue, now it's asking if we wanted to include the dependencies for our router and for state management, or if we have any specific requirements for routing and state management. I'm going to say include them. No specific requirements. Okay, now it's moving on to the next step, which is which framework we like to use for the front end. Vuetify, Quasar, so it lists a few examples, or lets us provide our own as long as we know that we're responsible for knowing that it's compatible with Vue. I'm just going to say recommend. So we're going to let the LLM make a recommendation based on everything it knows so far. And so it goes and explains to us that Vuetify is just fine, and it tells us why it came to that conclusion. So I'm going to say, just go ahead and proceed. Proceed with Vuetify. All right, so now let's verify the selected framework is compatible with the chosen core technology. Are you using the latest version of Vue, or do you have a preferred version? Now, I did a tiny bit of research. I could say just recommend latest stable, but I want to go ahead and be a little specific here, and I'm going to say use 3.3, some version of 3. I'm going to say use latest stable version of 3.3, which might be 3.3.1, 3.3.5. I'm not really sure. Okay, so now it is saying good with that and asking us if we need state management. It referenced that earlier. We're going to say yes, and I'm going to again just say make a recommendation for which of the state management frameworks we should use. So it's recommended Pinea. I believe that's the way you pronounce it, Pina or Pinea. And it tells us why again, which is cool. And then it says, hey, are we good with Pinea? I'm going to say, yes, we shall proceed with Pinea. And moving on to the next one, do we require routing? Yes, we do. And again, I'm just going to ask it to make a recommendation for routing. And the next requirement, it's asking, do we need form handling validation? Well, yeah, we're going to have forms for journal entries, and we're going to need to validate the entry. So I'm going to say yes. And again, I'm going to ask it for its recommendation. All right, it's recommending vvalidate, and it's giving us the justification for that. And then it's asking us if we are, well, actually in this case, it's just selecting it for us. And now it's asking if we need an HTTP client library. So we're not going to need it right now, but we're going to need it in the next tutorial. So I'm just going to go ahead and set us up for success there and have it install those dependencies as well. I'm going to say yes, and again, recommend. Now I happen to know it's likely to recommend Axios in this case. Okay, HTTP Axios, and tells us why. And then any additional UI features. So if I were to say like what, it would probably recommend like a rich client editor or something like that. But I'm going to say no, because we want to, our goal here is to scaffold the project and get a basic, maybe one step above hello world going. So we don't want to muddy the waters just yet. So I'm going to say no, no additional requirements. So now it's going to perform the version selection and the compatibility analysis for us as we instructed in our prompt. And I'm going to say, go for it. All right, and here are the different libraries that we selected and the versions, and supposedly it's performed the compatibility analysis between each of these versions to make sure we're good, asking us if we can go ahead and generate the BOM. I'm going to say again, go for it. Okay, and so it gives us a nice little JSON output that we can copy, and I've got an empty file here just waiting for this, and I'm going to save this file. Now that we have our requirements and our tech stack, it's time to generate our initial set of user stories to get our app up and running. So we'll go back to the prompts drop down, and in our prompt library we have a prompt for doing just that. Generate an initial bare bones version of the app's project, and we can see here's the prompt in our prompt library. Use the information from the requirements, architecture, tech stack, or bill of materials to generate an initial set of user stories, and we give the LLM more guidance and say, hey, we're just trying to get our app going and scaffold our project, and we give it some examples of what we're looking for in this set of user stories. And we basically say, in other words, we want a sort of hello world instantiation of our project, but using the core frameworks from our BOM. All right, so let's go ahead and execute this. Okay, we can see that Cody has generated our 3 user stories, and our prompt we specified no more than 3, shouldn't even any more than 3. And you can see we have some detailed acceptance criteria for each of these stories, including some hints on the versions of the frameworks from our BOM file. Okay, it didn't put it in Markdown. I probably need to refine the prompt. I'm gonna go ahead and ask it to put it in Markdown to just make the formatting nicer when we copy it. Put that in Markdown format. Okay, now we can copy that, and I have an empty file waiting for this. And I'm going to paste that into this file. And that's all we're going to be doing with Cody for now, so I'm going ahead and close the chat prompt. Before we get into coding, let's do a quick recap of where we are. So we started with this very rough description of an app we wanted to create. Then we went into Cody, and we used prompts from our prompt library to first, based on this project idea, help us generate a list of requirements for our app, and then using those requirements, help us ideate on a tech stack, and then come up with a list of libraries, dependencies, versions, etc. Then we used another prompt in Cody from our prompt library to generate a set of initial user stories to help us scaffold the project based on those requirements and that tech stack. So now we're ready to fire up Aider. So I'll open a terminal, and I'll initialize Aider. And then we'll start Aider up with the Sonnet LLM, Claude 3.5 Sonnet. Initialize get project. Now we have all these documents in our project docs directory that can provide all this context to help Aider implement the user stories, and we have the user stories as well. So what we can do to get those into Aider's context is use Aider's read-only command and point to the project docs directory, and it'll basically suck in all the documents in there and add them to its context. So now it knows about the requirements, the BOM.json file, all of that stuff. And also notice there's one more file that we didn't talk about yet, and this is a file called prompt implement user story. This is similar to the concept that we saw with the prompt library in Cody, although in this case I'm actually putting it inside of our project, so it's project specific. But there are ways to have Aider Aider auto load prompts and other files such as coding standards, whatever you want, for every Aider session. I'm not going to get into that here. We're going to specifically load it the way that we did with the read-only option, or the read-only command here. This prompt contains all the instructions that we want Aider to follow anytime we ask it to implement any user story. So basically we can trigger it this way by saying, hey, we want to implement user story XYZ. And here we're saying, when I ask you to implement user story, before starting, I want you to state using your user story implementation prompt. That way we know for sure that this prompt is kicking in. And then we provided detailed instructions like, tell us that you understand the goal of the user story, and then adhere strictly to the user story acceptance criteria. And then here's how to deal with core tools and dependency management when you're implementing the user story. And then here's some other instructions for implementing the package management. So try to use only the core package managers and not a bunch of external tools that we're going to have to install. But here, very importantly, we're saying always formulate a plan of action before you start implementing code changes, and always make code changes incrementally, even within a user story. So let's go ahead and start creating user stories, because as we can see, that is already loaded into Aider's context. So we'll say implement, I'm going to say start implementing user story 1. And we can already see that it is using our prompt from our folder here, because it's saying using your user story implementation prompt. And it tells us what it's about. It's about setting up new Vue.js project with Vuetify integration. The goal is to create a foundation for the building of an AI-powered brainstorming and journaling app. So then it says, I'm going to start by identifying the core tools, Node.js, NPM, get. Now I'm going to proceed with the implementation plan, initializing the Vue project, installing, configuring Vuetify, creating a simple hello world component using Vuetify, and ensuring the app runs without errors. So let's start with the first step, initializing a new Vue.js project. So here are the commands that are going to need to be executed: making a new directory, seeding, and then initializing the project using npm. And then it's going to create a package.json file to start collecting our dependencies for our project. And then we're going to need to install those dependencies in the package.json, and there's some other JavaScript files that it's going to initialize to get us going as well. And then it asks us for permission to start creating these files. We're going to say yes to all of them. So you can see it's creating all of these files that it referenced here, the package.json, etc. And then it's offering to run those commands that we just looked at to create the directories and then to initialize the project using npm. We're going to say, yeah, go ahead and do that for us. So it did all of that. And we can take a quick peek at the Vue.json, and it has some scripts for serving up and building and linting the application. It has some dev dependencies, and it has our project dependency. Right now it's just Vue 3.3.4. All right, so then to ensure that Aider hangs on to the information from the commands it ran, I'm going to say yes, go ahead and add that output to the chat. And now it's offering to run npm install. That will actually install our dependency. So we initialized the project, created a package.json file, but we haven't actually installed the dependencies yet. So we'll have Aider do that for us. Okay, so it ran the install. We should have the packages installed in our project. And then it asks, hey, do you want me to add the output of that command I just ran? I'm going to say yes, so it knows it did that successfully. And then I'm going to say continue implementing user story 1 unless we're done. Or misspell that, of course. Don't. Certainly, let's continue implementing user story. Next step is to install and configure Vuetify. So it's going to need to update our dependency file, package.json, to add Vuetify. And then it's going to need, or we're now going to need to run npm install to install Vuetify from the package.json. It's going to need to update some files to also include Vuetify. And we're not going to go over all of that right now. The one thing that I don't like to have Aider do is actually run the app. I like to run that in a different terminal. And we'll see that in just a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and say it wants to run the install because it updated all the files it needed to. I'm going to say yes, run npm install again. Install the Vuetify dependency. And I'll say yes, add that to your context so you remember the output of that. And I'm going to say no, don't run this. I want to go run this in a different terminal. So I'm going to copy this command in this case. I'm going to start a new terminal inside our project. And I'll fire up our app. npm run serve. So now we should have an app running on localhost 8080. Let's check it out. All right. So we have a basic hello world with a Viewtify button. Pretty cool. Let's go back and see if we're complete with user story 1. Back over to Aider. So I'm going to ask proceed. Well, I'm just going to give it the same prompt we gave it before. Continue to implement user story 1 unless we're done. Yeah, it's using our prompt still, and it says, based on the information you shared, it appears we've successfully completed user story 1, and then it reviews the criteria for user story 1 with us, and then sounds like we're good. Okay, let's go ahead and say, now start implementing user story 2. Again, you can see it's using our prompt. Implement basic routing and state management, and it outlines the goals to make sure that it understands it. Set up view router and Pinea for state management, and handle navigation and manage application state. Okay, cool. So those are the acceptance criteria, correct? And it kind of repeats this. Node and NPM, we already know that we're good there. And it needs to update package.json to include view router and Pinea. And then, of course, to install the new things, we need to run npm install. It gives us some more guidance there. Make some more changes to the JavaScript files related to these router changes and state management. And then it asks if it can go ahead and create the new files. We say yes, yes. So it creates the new files for us. And again, to install these new dependencies, we need to let it run npm install. All right, again, so that it knows the output of this. I'm going to say yes, go ahead and remember this. All right, so now I'm going to say continue to implement user story 2 unless we're done. Okay, it's picking back up with our prompt. And it says the next logical step is to create the about component and its route. Here's the plan for this increment. Create the about component, add the about route to the router configuration. Go ahead and let's make changes or create a file about.view. Make changes in this case, sorry. And then update our index.js for the router. And then update the app.view again. And it describes the changes it made. And then it says, hey, can we create this new about.view file? Say yes. All right. So let's see, we are good. Let's go check out. Let's see, I don't see any errors now. There were some temporary hiccups while all that was going on, but now it looks like we're good again. So let's check out our app. All right, it's changed. So now we have, this is all different. We have an AI brainstorming app. We have 2 menu items, about, and we have 2 different pages, actually, home page and about page. All right, very cool. Now let's go back to Aider again, see what's left for user story 2, if anything. Continue to implement user story 2 unless we're done. All right, and here's the plan for this increment of user story, because we've got more to do for that story, it looks like. Setting up Pinea in the main.js file, creating a simple store for managing a counter state, update the home component to use the store, and then it goes through the updates it's going to make for us through the JavaScript. And it explains what these changes are for and what they'll do. And then we're going to go ahead and say it needs to create a couple of files, it looks like. Counter.js, we'll say yes, go ahead. Right, 1 in that case. Let's see what changed in the app. Okay, no errors here. And let's see if anything actually changed. Oh, yes, it did actually. So now we have an increment and a decrement counter. So we have state management now as well. Awesome. All right, back over to Aider. And let's go ahead and ask it again. Are we done? Continue to implement user story 2 unless we're done. All right. After reviewing the current state of the project, it appears we have successfully completed all the requirements for user story 2. Let's recap what we've accomplished. So let's go ahead and do our last story, which is user story 3. Let's start user story 3. All right, so again, you can see it's using our prompt, our stored prompt, and it says, let's review the goal, And it tells us what the goal is for, integrating vValidate for form handling and Axios for HTTP requests to use manage user input, and the acceptance criteria. And then it says what it's going to do. Let's start by installing the new required dependencies, Axios and vValidate, updating our dependencies in our package.json file, and then creating a new component for form entry, and updating our home.view file. And then it tells us what these changes will be. Again, I've already run this npm run serve, and then it wants permission to create the entry form. Say yes. All right, so now Aider is offering to install vValidate and Axios. Now, one of the areas that I've really had issues in the past with getting AI to generate these kinds of apps is dependency management and sticking to the versions that I want. I hope I've solved this with my recent prompting strategies, but let's go ahead and check our BOM file and make sure that we did specify vValidate 4.11.6 and Axios 1.5.0. Okay, golden. It looks like it's actually adhering to what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and say run the shell command and install those dependencies for us. Okay, it installed. And now it wants to know, again, I like to have it remember the output of the file, the commands it runs for us. So we'll say yes. Again, I already have npm serve running here. Oh, we have an error. Let's see what's going on here. So we're going to go ahead and turn around and give this error back to Aider. Copy. Paste. That's our first error this time. I'm going to say no, don't run it. All right, so I'm going to say we have this error, and I'm going to paste it and see what Aider says about it. All right, so the error is occurring because the yup package is not installed in the project. We need to install it and update the entry form.view file to remove the yup import. So first let's install yup. That's a dependency it determined that we need that we didn't specify. Update the entry form.view file. Import yup. I think I said that wrong before, but anyway. These changes remove the dependency on yup and use vValidate. Oh, okay, I see. So after making these changes, run the following command to install the new dependency and start the development server. So let's go ahead and have it run npm install yup. Okay, it installed yup for us. And yes, I'm going to say remember the output of that command. I don't want it to run serve. Let's see, npm install yup. It already did this. So I'm going to say no, don't run that command. Let's go back over and see if our error went away. Beautiful. Let's take a look at our app, make sure it's still working. All right, great. So we've still got our state management, increment, decrement. Now we can put in an entry title, test title. We can submit. We can fetch data. We don't really have, that's some canned data that Aider must have generated for us. We have our about page. Things are looking great. So let's go back to Aider again. And let's go back with our standard prompt of, I'm going to say continue, if I can type, implementing user story 3 unless we're done. Okay, so it says it appears that we have completed all the requirements for user story 3, so all of our acceptance criteria. Very cool. Now we have our bare bones app up and running. At the beginning of this tutorial, I promised that at the end I would share a cool little prompt from my prompt library that can help act as a sort of tutor for you. It can help you to understand the code that was generated, the technologies and frameworks that are being used, how they relate to each other, explore more. So basically using AI to help you learn through what you're building. So we're going to open up a new chat in Cody, and I've created another prompt in my prompt library, code-based explanation. Teach me about my project. And so Cody pulls the contents of my prompt from my prompt library, and this is basically an AI tutor for code explanation. And it gives detailed explanations to the LLM to act as a tutor for this code base. To first to do a code review, analyze the code, Start with a high-level overview, provide that to me, identify 3 to 5 key files or functions that are crucial for understanding the app, and then start in sort of an interactive learning session with me to let me explore and learn more about the code and the technologies. So there's a lot of detail in here. I'm going to go ahead and execute this prompt. Okay. So now Sonic comes back with, yeah, I'm ready to begin a code review with you. And here's a high-level overview. The app is built in Vue.js 3.3.4, even gives us the specific version numbers as the main framework, and then Vuetify for UI components. It uses VueRouter 4.2.4 for navigation and Pinea for state management. And here's the project structure. So it gives us the key files. The main.js app view tells us what each one is used for. And asks us, do you have any initial questions about these technologies or their implementation? And I'm just going to say, tell me more about state management in this app. Okay, so yes, I'll be happy to tell you. The app uses Pinea 2.1.6 for state management, which is a modern state management solution. It tells us where an example of this Pinea is being used. And then it gives us the source code. And then it starts walking us through an explanation of this code. This store defines a simple counter with a state property count, and then explains to us how Pinea makes this easier. And then the store can be easily used with components by importing and calling use counter store function. Okay, I'm going to say, let's see, would you like me to explain more about how this store can be used in components, or do you have other questions? Yes, tell me more. Okay, it's going to tell us more about the Pinea store and how it can be used in components in this app. And then it shows us an example of the counter being used. This is actually from our app. There's a template that's calling the counter.count function and using Pinea's state management. And then it explains more to us. Now I ask, would you like to know more about advanced features of Pinea or how it compares? And I'm going to say, no, tell me more about routing, because that's a concept that might be new to us, about routing for this app. Okay, I'd be happy to tell you more about routing. The app uses VueRouter 4.2.4 for handling navigation, and then it shows us the contents of the index.js file, which is using the routing features. And then it explains the contents of it and how the routing works. And then it asks, would you like to know more about how to use the router and components, or do you have more questions about routing in the app? I'm going to go back to the original high-level overview it gave to us, see what else we might want to know about. So we talked about routing, we talked about state management, and tell me a little bit more about main.js. Tell me more about the main.js file. Okay, so it's going to walk us through the contents of this file, tell us what each of these code sections do, and then tell us, okay, this setup integrates all the main technologies used in the Vue app. So it tells us the role of the main.js file and what it does and how it ties everything together. Now we could keep going and keep going. We could pick different aspects of this. We could pick different components and keep diving down. But you see that the prompt is crafted in such a way that it'll start by examining the code base, give us a high-level overview of the key components, and then give us sort of a guided tour through, letting us lead and ask when we want to examine a particular component or a concept further. And it's kind of crafted as almost like a little mini tutor for your application and the tech stack that it's using. So we successfully used Cody AI to define our project scope, generate requirements, define our tech stack, and produce our user stories for the initial app. We then switched over to Aider to scaffold the initial code base. And finally, we got AI to educate us so we can learn about our app and also expand our knowledge of the new technologies. And we did all that using just a small set of carefully crafted prompts from our prompt library. I hope you're as excited about the possibilities these kinds of tools and workflows open up as I am. Now we'll continue using this approach to build out our app in the next tutorial. If you're finding these tutorials helpful, be sure to like and subscribe. Also, if you have suggestions for how I can make future tutorials more helpful for you, let me know in the comments below. And we'd love to have you join our new School.com community by the name of Coding the Future with AI, where you can collaborate with others, get more in-depth help, and just have fun learning more about AI for software engineering. I'm Tim Kitchens, Coding the Future with you, and I'll see you in the next video.